Hello, and welcome to the Stonebridge Press podcast. I'm your host and publisher of Stonebridge Press, Peter Goodman. I'm in Berkeley, and in New York is Michael Palmer. Hey, Michael.
Howdy, Peter.
Stonebridge Press publishes books on many different Asian-related subjects, and most of them have to do with Japan. Now, you can find out more about Stonebridge Press at www.stonebridge.com, and you can also find us on Substack and on Twitter and on Facebook. Today's guest is Jim Rion, and Jim is the author of a new Stonebridge Press book called Discovering Yamaguchi Sake. Jim is a licensed international kikizakeshi, or a sake taster, sake sommelier. He's a certified sake professional and a freelance translator and writer who's been working in the sake industry since 2018. He has lived in Yamaguchi Prefecture, which is in southern Japan, since 2004. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Thank you very much for having me, Peter. Good to see you, Michael.
So I don't think we really have to explain what sake is anymore. Although I feel I should point out it's not a beer, it's not wine. It's kind of its own thing entirely, and it's generally got an alcohol level a bit higher than wines. But maybe, that's where a lot of people's knowledge about sake begins and ends. Mm-hmm. People know you can drink it hot or cold, but, whether you do that intelligently probably depends on the kind of sake you have and maybe the occasion. And there are lots of different kinds of sake, and not all of them are available at your local Japanese restaurant, particularly if that restaurant is in Europe or in California. They're importers, distributors of sake, but they don't necessarily pull everything from Japan. So the variety in Japan is probably a lot more than the variety here, and it's not necessarily the case that the people who are picking out sake for American Japanese restaurants know or care a lot about the quality of the sake that they're serving. That's probably changing a bit these days as people's interest and knowledge about food and cuisine increases. And I want to talk about all those things, particularly about Yamaguchi Sake. But first, I'm really curious, Jim, as to how you ended up where you are. You're in way southern Japan, and you're you're on the coast, from what I can tell. But you're kind of in a remote area. You're not in a big city. You're between cities, but you're in a fairly small town.
Right. I fear that it's not a particularly exciting story. I have a master's degree in German. Linguistics and literature, and I was living in Germany after I got that done, and I just ran out of money. You know how it works when you're a grad student, and things don't always balance out that way. And I didn't want to go back to the States. This was in 2004, and it was right then that a friend of mine, just out of the blue, a friend from university, sent an email saying, I'm here in Yamaguchi Prefecture. I'm in Japan. I'm teaching English, and my school has an opening. Or would you be interested? I came out to teach English in 2004, and it seems to have stuck because 19 years later, here I am.
And so where's the interest in sake come from?
It started just as being here. I came in 2004, which was actually part of a really sort of transformational period for sake in general, but particularly in Yamaguchi, where this idea of like the super premium drinks were taking off. And I think people have probably heard of Dasai. That was really early on in their kind of rocket trip to the moon, and people were serving me local sake, and it really made an impression. I particularly back in those days, sake that you got overseas was just not very good at all. Like there was just nothing there. It was really cheap stuff that was probably mishandled. And when I came to Japan, it was just a completely different drink, and so it was delicious. And it was here. It was just everywhere. And then at a certain point, as I got better at Japanese and I got more sort of connected to people locally, I've always been really interested in like craft and traditional sort of techniques at making things, like they call monozukuri in Japan. And sake happens to be a very, very hand labor intensive craft. And people would say, if you're interested in craft, then you should visit sake breweries. And so I did, and it was fascinating.
Did you just show up on the doorstep, or how does that work?
No, I had an introduction. Like, I was at dinner at a German friend's house, and they had visited sake breweries themselves, and one of the other guests at the party was a Japanese couple, and they said they had a friend who ran a sake brewery, and if I was interested in a tour, they would be happy to introduce me.
Oh,
and that was Yamagata Honten. Yamagata Toshiro is the man's name who runs it, and he's been sort of my guide, my mentor in the local sake industry ever since.
Let's dive in a little deeper into the sake. Your book is really interesting. One of the reasons that I was interested in doing it as a publisher was that it was really the first book that I knew of to really treat a particular region, as a sake producing region, as opposed to just being a kind of a general explanation about sake for the non-Japanese readers. There have been plenty of those books out introducing sake, how to drink it. Some of them go into more or less detail, but yours was really the first to look at just a particular region. However, this is a subject of discussion in your book as well, so I'm not really putting on you a spot. A lot of skeptics will say that the only thing that makes Yamaguchi Sake is you have the geopolitical borders that define Yamaguchi Prefecture, that the idea of terroir, as they say in sake, is kind of a misnomer, or it's not real, or it's just some sort of marketing invention. So what do you think? Does it make sense to talk about terroir and use that to kind of justify or to talking about Yamaguchi? Or what do you think makes Yamaguchi Sake distinctive?
Okay, so there's a couple things here. In terms of terroir, right, it's one of these terms that you just can't escape when you're talking about anything that you sort of eat or drink these days. Like it's everywhere. It's in coffee and chocolate and everything. And I really struggle with just pinning down what it means. And I mentioned this in the book, that if you're talking about sort of this physiological influence of natural factors that is sort of shared by all of the producers in a certain region or something, it doesn't have anything to do with sake. It's irrelevant.
Why is it irrelevant?
Because sake is a product that is made from natural ingredients through relatively natural processes of fermentation and things, but it's intensely managed, and every variable is really, really scrutinized and controlled, and the end result is probably 90% intentional. It is the product of human intention.
So whether you're working on a mountaintop or in a valley, it's not going to make much difference. It's not the amount of rainfall or sunshine or climate or soil quality that's going to affect the taste of the sake.
Right. It's not defined by the natural environment. I'd say that's influenced, but it's much more strongly influenced by the people who are making it. And that's really what I want this book to be about, is about the people. And so when you ask me, what is it that makes Yamaguchi Sake distinctive? Well, it's the people making it. The people who are here in Yamaguchi, the community that they're part of, the farmers that they work with, the restaurants and sake sellers who serve the products to local groups. And I really wanted this to sort of show people about sort of the depth and the breadth of community when it comes to sake brewing.
I should mention your book covers all 23 breweries, plus one more brewery that doesn't brew its own stuff.
Right.
And though your approach to them is quite fascinating. Actually, I consider it a tour de force, I think, of reporting, because for each brewery, you're kind of telling the same story,
right, yeah.
How this get to be a brewer, how do they do it, who are the people involved, and yet you're able to present very, very individualistic portraits of all the different people involved in that and all the ups and downs that the breweries suffered and what makes their particular products distinct, how they sell it, what kind of rice they use, what kind of process they use to manufacture it. And it's all told in a kind of a narrative reportage style. What would you say defines I know it's hard, there's 23 different breweries, they're all different, but what do you think they are all I mean, can you say they all have something in common? And
The one thing, and this is not just me, it's everybody I talk to locally who says the same thing. Like the one thing that every sake brewery in Yamaguchi has in common is that they're incredibly individualistic. Like they really, really are into sort of doing their own thing. But I would also say that overall, there is a really strong drive towards just rooting the business locally as much as possible. Even say a really huge company like Asahi Shuzo have contracts with local farmers. They do have that sense of maintaining a local link. And that's another thing, Yamaguchi has one of the largest sake brewers in Japan. It also has one of the very, very smallest with Shintani Shuzo. So we have this huge range of just an enormous variety of breweries, but all of them do share that. They have that sense of, we want to produce something that has that emotional and sort of verifiable link to the local community. And I think, sort of getting back to that idea of terroir, I think that if you want to say that there is any terroir in sake, I think it's that sort of emotional value, like knowing that the people who made this really, really, really care.
So that sounds like something that could be easy to translate at a local or regional level, say in southern Honshu, where people are familiar with the towns and places and maybe some of the people. How does that work, though, with larger Japan? I mean, they probably maybe don't have much of a sense of what Yamaguchi Sake is all about. And then when you go overseas, they have no clue. And sake is just sake, and they have no idea that where it comes from. They don't have any sense of history or culture. None of that romance is built into it. Is that basically up to the marketing people to try and kind of craft the image of sake overseas?
I'm afraid that it might be. I'm afraid that at this point, it's very much in the hands of the people who are bringing sake over to sell. And obviously the idea of crafting a narrative is, I think, a major part of the modern public relations or advertising sphere. And I think for that, it's a ready-made product, right? The narrative is there. You just have to kind of be able to tell it. And lo and behold, some guy decided he wanted to write a book to talk all about these very interesting stories, and maybe some people could use that. Even in Japan, I think you got onto something. Like the sense of Yamaguchi as a sake brewing area has not really taken hold yet, but it is getting there. Particularly, I think in the past couple of years, we've had some small breweries that have really good marketing. Like you mentioned that, this idea of there are these small family breweries where maybe somebody has some really sharp ideas, and there've been a couple of breweries recently that have taken off on things like social media, right? I don't know, I guess you'd say grassroots. I don't know, but people have really gotten into them because of the way the bottles are labeled, the designs, and a very modern approach to how they sell the sake, which has, I think, started to kind of overflow to give Yamaguchi a I guess, prominent reputation as a place where.
Now do you think some of this stuff is happening because some of the breweries are hiring high-powered marketing firms that have their finger on the pulse of the public and are very adept at using social media? Or is it possibly because they themselves have hired a lot of younger generation brewers and people among their own staff who are very aware of how people are consuming information and how products are being pitched these days?
I very much think it's going to be the latter.
Yeah.
There are a couple of breweries who do have, sort of savvy marketing teams, but they're only the biggest ones, right? But there are many breweries now that have, very young staff members. There are more women involved in sake brewing in Yamaguchi now, and many of them are much more sort of keyed into modern trends and how things work, sort of in terms of how products are sold.
Yeah, I was really struck by that, the number of women involved, and also number of young people who had careers in completely different areas, whether it was science or engineering. In some cases, I think there was someone who worked at a big advertising or marketing agency or something.
So there's one brewery, Abunotsuru Shuzo, which is in a tiny, tiny, tiny little town on the other side of the island. It's a family business that had closed down. They had stopped brewing, but they had kept their license. And the oldest son had gone to Tokyo to be an interior designer for like retail marketing. He decided he wanted a career change. And so up around Tokyo, he started, working at sake breweries for years before he actually remembered, oh, wait, my family has a sake brewery. So he went back home and decided to get the sake brewery back open. And his sort of, I guess, interior design is a different sort of thing, but his sense of design and his connections with the design industry, right? He has, people who are in graphic design who are friends and colleagues and stuff. And he's really leveraged that in his marketing, and just incredibly striking designs and award-winning labels and things like that.
What was really the name of the brewery again?
It's Abunotsuru, but the label that is probably most popular is called Miyoshi. And you absolutely can recognize it. Like you'll there's lots of different designs, but they all have this really bold 3 lines in the middle, which in Japanese is the kanji for 3.
I've seen this before, yeah.
Yeah. It's it's really striking. It's really memorable.
It is kind of interesting to think, because you were talking about sake as a craft, and you speak to the craftspeople, and they're all kind of complaining that, well, all of us are getting old. This is a hard life. It demands a lot of apprenticeship, low pay. There aren't many Japanese people who want to do this kind of thing anymore, and yet the crafts survive and they persist. And I wonder to what extent they are doing that, because some of the people getting involved are young and engaged. They're not artists who want to leave the world behind, but they're people who are very much aware of what's happening in the world. And they're using modern methods of not production so much. The craft remains the craft, but they are a lot more savvy about delivering the craft to the people who want it by non-traditional means. And that may in a way be ironically responsible for the survival of a lot of traditional crafts that have no high tech in them whatsoever.
I definitely see what you're saying. Like the Japanese ceramics Instagram world is brilliant. Like there's a lot of people, younger potters who are making videos on Instagram about how they make their stuff, and I do think that's probably going to contribute. And the same is true in sake. Just like you said, it's very difficult work that's low paid, doesn't have a lot of social credibility. Like people aren't super excited in most places to find out people are sake brewers. It's not a career that young people, it's just not a career that young people are like, oh yeah, I want to brew sake.
Right, exactly.
But even that maybe is starting to change because, like I said, we are getting more young people. More sake brewers are taking a more, I don't know how to put it, corporate approach where, it's not this ancient system of seasonal workers who come in and do really hard manual labor for 3 months. No, they're permanent employees who have sick days and insurance and all of that stuff that people need to make a job a career in Japan these days.
Now, you made a conscious point of covering all the breweries in Yamaguchi so that no one would feel left out. And I know you had to do a lot of negotiation with the people and like getting them to kind of approve what you're doing and do interviews and provide the right illustrations and the labels and everything.
Yeah.
So I assume that they are all pretty supportive of this book. What kind of reaction have you gotten from the breweries?
I've sent every brewery a copy. I haven't talked to everyone since I did that. The people that I was able to sort of hand one over, personally and say, we did it. We're all extremely supportive. That trip, I went on a little trip just passing out books, and I came home with a lot of swag. So that was gratifying.
So it was all worth it in the end.
It was all worth it in the end. My plan is coming to fruition. Swag. But yeah, people. There was a lot of disbelief at first. I was like, is there enough here for a book? So I was like, you just leave that to me. That's my job. Your job is just to show me what's going on. But people have been overall quite supportive. A couple of breweries were hesitant. One brewery, I didn't get a chance to interview anybody because for just like personal reasons, they're like it's a traditional craft industry in Japan, so a lot of these people are quite elderly, and some of them, are just not really keen on talking to strangers all that much, which is fine. I have visited every single sake brewery. I have, like I say in the book, I've tasted the water. I've smelled the air. I've met the people involved. None of that is false. But for this book, I was not able to interview a couple of the people that I wanted to interview.
There has not been another book that just deals with a prefecture, right? I mean, are there other prefectures in Japan that you think might support a book like this? Like, I mean, you mentioned Niigata and around Osaka and.
If people get aware of it, I absolutely think that they would love to have something like this. There's a sake brewer in Mie Prefecture who's like, next you have to come to Mie. I'm like, I don't know anything about Mie except your brewery.
Yeah. So, well, maybe you could franchise the idea out to other writers, Jim.
There you go.
You just be like the supervising editor and get other people to go and write the stuff. Because I suspect that all the stories of those breweries are very individualistic too.
I absolutely believe it. And, I don't want people to get the wrong idea. I don't want people to think I'm saying that, Yamaguchi Sake is number one and nobody else makes a good sake. Absolutely not. I love Yamaguchi Sake. I love sake from all over Japan.
Is there a Japanese analog to your book?
No. When I was thinking of this idea, there was one book it's about Akita Prefecture that was sort of sponsored by the Akita Sake Brewers Association. And it does feature all of the breweries, but it's like a paragraph for each one. Like it's really just more like a promotional material thing.
I suspect it's quite different. The politics involved in doing a book in Japanese for a Japanese audience are quite different. You're kind of an outsider, so it's really easy for people to deal with you because you don't. What harm could this poor guy do?
I genuinely think that's true. He's writing in English. What do we care?
Yeah.
Is I think a big part of it, right? But whereas if it was in Japanese, and there are some brewers who do have some English, and they were so picky about word choice.
Really?
Things like they really, really, really wanted to make sure that I was being like positive and supportive, and I had to reassure them, like, listen, I don't have any kind of agenda. I'm not trying to like harm you. I'm not, Mr. I'm going to spill all your secrets. No, I wanted just to get the honest story. Whereas, I think there are, as businesses, there are some people who are particularly image conscious who want to control the way they are presented publicly as much as possible.
Does this have to do with like gossip, or is there any juicy?
It's just appearances. No, I wish. No, there's no salacious juiciness to be
the wife
had
of
here.
One brewer is sleeping with the brewer next door, and they can't talk about.
I mean, at a certain point, we're talking about sort of traditional family businesses. In a relatively outlying area, there's a lot of family stuff going on here, right? There are sake brewers who are related to each other and who maybe don't get along all that well, and there are always you're going to have these interpersonal kinds of things, and I didn't want to get too personal about any of that. I really wanted to focus on the brewing and the business, but even then, there are people who really, really, really want to keep control of sort of the message and the image that goes out there.
Well, I would say overall, human portraits that emerge from the book are quite fascinating, and they're all so varied, so different.
I'm so glad to hear that.
And yet, it's interesting. They're all pursuing the same goal. They may not all have the same idea of what sake is supposed to be, but everyone seemed intent on making a really, really good product that they can be proud of. Part of what you have in your book is a travel guide. Mm-hmm. A mini travel guide to Yamaguchi, on the assumption is that if you're into sake and you're going to go all the way to Yamaguchi, you don't want to spend 24 hours a day drinking, or maybe you do, but there's other stuff to do in Yamaguchi. So you have a whole chapter on that.
Yeah.
And presumably, as people are traveling around, they may want to visit a sake brewery. What do you suggest for someone who reads about one of the breweries in the book and says, "Oh, that sounds really interesting. I'd like to go visit them." What do you think they should do?
So the only real tricky part is transport. Obviously, if you're driving, you're not going to be able to drink. But if you're not driving, it's hard to get to lots of these places. So my first recommendation is to go to Iwakuni City. Iwakuni City is easily reached from Hiroshima City. It's like a 20-minute train ride. And once you're there, there's 3 sake breweries in the center of town. 2 of them are less than a 5-minute walk apart. One of them is right beside the Shinkansen station, Murashige Shuzo. So not only can you visit some sake breweries fairly easily, but you can also do a lot of sightseeing. Iwakuni has a beautiful castle, a bridge that is sort of a national treasure. There's a lovely park in the center of town with lots of old samurai mansions. It's a great place to visit in general.
And if you visit a brewery, do they have tastings there so you can like sample a glass or?
So if you can arrange a brewery visit in advance, most places will have tastings. I would say if you specifically are looking for like a casual tasting, Murashige Shuzo in Iwakuni is a place that has a tasting room. Right, it's specifically made, nice tables and stuff. It is important to remember that most of these places are just working breweries. In places like sort of in bigger cities, they'll have restaurants and things attached, but in Yamaguchi, that's still not quite where we're at. Places that are particularly set up for tourists, Murashige Shuzo, obviously Asahi Shuzo Dasai, but they're in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
You basically have to charter a car to get you there. Temi is Choshu Shuzo out by Shimonoseki is really, really set up for tourists. Like they've got you can go up onto the second floor and walk around. They have a corridor set up with windows looking down on all of the brewing facilities. And they do have a tasting room as well. But again, it's in the middle of nowhere. So if you have the chance to set up transportation in advance, that's a good place to go.
So if you don't speak Japanese at some of these places, you'll probably be okay.
Yeah, I think lots of places, it's going to vary, I think. But if you look in the book, I do list places that offer tours and the language support that gives them. Just be aware that you're not going to show up to most places and just get a tour. You're going to have to either go in advance or find a place that has a tasting room open to the public.
I think one of the things that it occurs to me that if you're staying at a hotel there, it's possible that the concierge or someone at the front desk may be able to call and help you arrange a tour. I suppose you could always ask for that. One of the things you mentioned in your book, though, was that I think you were talking about some of the izakaya where you can go and they have a huge selection of local brews, and you might have to buy like a full glass. You may end up drinking
the terrible pain.
Do you speak sake? Well, by the end of the night, I'm sure you do.
There you go.
But so there are plenty of opportunities for tasting, and of course, hanging out at Japanese nomiya is quite a lot of fun. Particularly if you can't drive, you just while the night away with drinking sake. So where can people find you online, Jim? So
I have a website, www.jimrion.com. That's RION. I am on Instagram at Jim_and_Jizake. That's JIZAKE. And I'm also like on Mastodon these days, which is, the kind of thing to be on for people who can't stand Twitter anymore. Right. But that's probably just easier to link somewhere from my website. So, scour my website looking for social media links.
Okay. Well, good. Well, it's been great talking to you.
Good to talk to you guys. Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to finding some more of this Yamaguchi Sake. I basically go to Bevmo, which is a big liquor barn sort of place, and I have not seen anything from Yamaguchi yet.
You're in Berkeley, so you could probably make it to True Sake, yeah?
Yeah.
It's in San Francisco, yeah.
He's got Umami Mart.
Umami Mart, yeah.
Umami Mart should have some as well, yeah.
I'm just very lazy.
That's okay. Well, you know what? Well, let's call Bo and I'll have him send you some.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, you go ahead and do that. All right.
Yeah, and definitely go to our website, stonebridge.com, and check out Jim's book. It's Discovering Yamaguchi Sake. A Taster's Guide to Breweries, Culture, and Terrain.
Not to mention all of our many other books about Japan.
That's true. Yeah.
All right. Good talking to you, Jim.
Thank you. It was good to talk to you, Peter.